Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the book of Malachi as we complete our survey of the Old Testament. Malachi chapter 1 verse 1 starts off, the oracle of the word of the Lord to Israel through Malachi. Now the name Malachi actually means my messenger, and we're going to see a bit later where there might be a bit of a play on words on that name. It has been noted by Dr. O. Palmer Robertson, my Old Testament theology professor, that Malachi focuses upon three creation ordinances. He focuses upon a worship mandate, on a marriage mandate, and on a labor mandate. And we can remember how each one of those had its beginning in the book of Genesis. Robertson says Genesis offers a panoramic picture of creational order by setting forth the basic ordinances of Sabbath worship, marriage, and labor, and Malachi concludes the final chapter of the Old Covenant narrative by returning to these identical themes. Well, let's see how it plays out. In Malachi chapter 1, we start off God saying to his people after the short introduction, I have loved you, and the people respond with a question. Notice there's a sort of a question and answer format that's going to run through a good portion of this book. God says, I have loved you. The people ask, well, how have you loved us? And the answer is that God has blessed Israel above other nations, so much so that he can say, Israel, Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. God has blessed Israel, and because God has blessed Israel, Israel is more responsible for that blessing. In chapter 1, verse 6, God says, if I am a father, where is my honor? And the people respond. Notice Malachi's giving both sides of this conversation. The people respond, how have we despised your name? That is, how have we dishonored your name? And the answer is that they have not offered their best to God. They've served God, but not with their best, not wholeheartedly, not as if he is really the God of the universe. In chapter 2, the people come back with the statement, if we are brothers, and this is a question, if we are brothers, why do we deal treacherously one with another? And the answer is that the people have defrauded each other in the area of divorce. This is where God says, I hate divorce. And divorce was an issue here because you remember back in the days of Ezra, there had been a problem with intermarriage where they had been taking foreign wives, and they had asked the question, what do we do? And the majority had come to a conclusion, let's divorce those foreign wives, and we'll take new wives that will only be Jewish and Israeli. And you can see why they did it, but now in the next generation, perhaps that is being seen as an excuse, sort of divorce is now an acceptable alternative, and now it's become a real problem. In chapter 2, verse 17, God says, you have wearied the Lord with your words. That is, you're saying one thing and you're doing another. The people ask, how have we worried him? And the answer is that people have asked for justice, but they have not acted justly. They're asking for one thing and acting another way. In chapter 3, verse 1, we have God's promised coming messenger. Malachi chapter 3, verse 1, behold, I am going to send my messenger, and the Hebrew here is, behold, I am going to send Malachi. It's a play on words on the name of the author. I'm going to send my messenger, and he will clear the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. So God says, I'm going to send my messenger, and my messenger will precede me, and then the Lord whom you seek is finally going to come to his temple. You remember how the temple had been, first of all, the tabernacle had been built by Moses when they had laid the final piece into its place. They had given a prayer of dedication, and the presence of the Lord had come into the tabernacle. Hundreds of years later, when they built the temple in the days of Solomon, they put the final brick into place, and Solomon offered a prayer of dedication, and the presence of the Lord came into the temple. Now, with the rebuilt temple in the days of Zerubbabel, they rebuilt the temple, they offered a prayer of dedication, they looked around, and nothing happened. The Lord still had not come to his temple, and they're waiting, and they're waiting, and they're waiting, and now a generation or two have passed, and now we have the very last book of the Old Testament, giving a promise that there's coming a day when the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap. In other words, there's some dirty things, there's some impurities, and his coming will remove those things. Verse 3, he will sit as a smelter and purifier of silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver, so that they may present to the Lord offerings in righteousness. And so there's a coming promise, but it's a coming in judgment. Chapter 3, verse 6, we go back to that question and answer format. God says, return to me, and I will return to you. You know, you're looking for me, and the reason I haven't come, you have not returned to me. And the people ask, well, how shall we return? And here is the answer. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Remember, your tithes were your offerings both to the Lord. The word tithe just means tenth. They were to give a tenth to the Lord, and from that would go some of the offerings toward the upkeep of the temple, and toward the priests, and toward the Levites, and also toward the poor. And so this was being ignored, and they were to remember the Lord not just with their words, but with their money, with their wallets. Chapter 3, verse 13, God says, your words have been arrogant against me. And the people ask, well, what have we spoken against you? How have we been arrogant against you? What have we said against you? And the answer is that they have taken the attitude that it is vain to serve the Lord. It just doesn't pay to serve God. Notice how this is linked to the previous issue of what are you doing with your work? What are you doing with your worth? Are you showing God his worth by what you do with your work and with your money? Chapter 3, verse 16, there's a promise of coming judgment and restoration. And we come to chapter 4, verse 1, and this book is only 4 chapters long. For behold, the day is coming, burning like a furnace, and all the arrogant and every evildoer will be chaff. Remember, chaff is when you take grain and you grind it, and the kernel sort of is there, but then the chaff, the husk, is broken apart. And you take the chaff and you separate it from the grain, and you keep the grain because that's good stuff, but the chaff you take it and burn. And every evildoer will be chaff, and the day that is coming will set them ablaze, says the Lord of hosts, so that it will leave them neither root nor branch. There's coming a time of judgment where the good and the bad are going to be separated, and that which is evil will be judged and burned. But for you who fear my name, notice the contrast, the Son, and that's S-U-N, not the Son as in the Son of God, but rather the Son like the one burning in the sky. You who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, and you will go forth and skip about like calves from the stall. Now we've seen this phrase, the wings, before. It has a very special meaning. Obviously, when we hear it, we think of the wings of a bird, and that's the same word that's used, but it has a meaning that goes beyond that. In his wings, 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 4. Remember how David gets up, he sneaks up on Saul, and he rose and cut off our translation says, the edge of Paula's robe secretly, but actually the Hebrew text has it, the wings of Saul's robe were cut off. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 12, the law says, you shall make yourselves tassels on the 4 corners of your garments. The Hebrew says, on the 4 wings of your garments. Now this doesn't mean that you had feathery wings like a bird. These were the corners, the outside corners of your garment. They were known as the wings of the garment. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 30, a man shall not take his father's wife, so that he shall not uncover his father's skirt. No, his father's wings. It's a euphemism for a sexual activity, in this case, in Deuteronomy 22:30, an inappropriate one. In the story of Ruth, you remember Ruth chapter 3, verse 9, where Ruth comes in the middle of the night, and Boaz feels a little drafty down there, and he says, who is that? And she answered and said, I am Ruth, your maid, so spread your Our English translation says you're covering over your maid. The Hebrew text says spread your wings over your maid, for you are a close relative. And that becomes a picture of the marriage that's eventually going to take place there. Now, back to Malachi. But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings. In a very literal way, this was fulfilled in the person of Jesus. You remember, he was on his way one day to perform a healing. There was a young girl that had fallen sick and was at the point of death, and he was on his way to perform a healing. And going through the crowd, a woman who had been sick for 12 years with an issue of blood. And it's an interesting parallel between the two, because the girl to whom he was going to heal, she was 12 years old. This woman who had suffered for 12 years thought, if I can only touch the hem of his garments, but the way you would say that in Hebrew, if that conversation had been Hebrew, you'd say, if I could only touch his wings. And she touched the wings of his garment, and she found healing in a very literal way. Now, I don't think this prophecy is only speaking about that literal healing that took place on that day. That's a picture of the healing that we have likewise when we come to Christ. We find that there has been healing, and notice the result. You will go forth and skip about like calves from the stall. It's a very, very happy look, maybe a little ungainly, but my goodness, it's just wonderful to find that sort of spiritual healing. Our book ends, the last two verses of Malachi, in fact, the last two verses of the entire Old Testament. Behold, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord, and he will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the land with a curse. This prophecy is mentioned again when we get to the book of Matthew. Jesus takes three of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, and they go up to a high mountain, and there Jesus is transfigured before them. And as they are coming down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man has risen from the dead. And they have just seen something that was extraordinary, so extraordinary they can only describe it in terms of the coming of the Lord. His glory had peeped out for an instant, and his clothing had been white as snow, and Moses and Elijah had appeared, but they had been sort of second place to the one that was with them, the Son of Man. And yet Jesus is telling them, don't tell that word to anyone. Eventually there will be a time to do that, but not yet. And his disciples asked him, why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And of course, they're quoting from those last two verses of Malachi when they asked that question. Jesus answered, and he said, Elijah is coming and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah already came, and they did not recognize him, but they did to him whatever they wished. So also the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hand. In other words, I am the Lord who is coming to the temple as was promised in Malachi. In fact, Jesus, you remember, was the one who stood in the temple and said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And fortunately, when John quotes that prophecy, he explains to us, or else we might not get it. He says, but he spoke of the temple of his body. He is the temple. And then his disciples, as they were hearing this, they understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist. That is, John the Baptist fulfills the prophecy of Elijah. After all, he came on the scene looking very Elijah-like, eating like Elijah, dressing like Elijah, even having a ministry to the king and queen, not a very friendly ministry, like Elijah had done. And so Elijah is the forerunner who points us to the coming of the Lord, the coming of Jesus. And that's where we go from our Old Testament to the New Testament. We see the one whose coming was promised all throughout the Old Testament scriptures from beginning to end, the one who came to save us from our sins, Jesus Christ the righteous, in whom we believe.